right now. And just wanted to introduce myself again. My name is Caitlin Shockley. I am the policy manager for ODDS, and I have been supporting most of these sessions. So you've probably seen me around these past 9 weeks many times. But today I'm excited to get to speak with you all. And my co-presenter, Missy Elliott, is also here, and I'm going to hand it over to her to introduce herself and kick off the presentation.
Hi, everyone, and good morning. Before I pull up the slides, I like to be in community with you when I'm doing introductions. So before I even introduce myself, one of the things that I love to do is get to know you all. So if I can ask while you're in here, if you have access to the chat, if you could put in your name, your pronouns, and where you work, if you work in ODDS, if you work in a CDDP or brokerage, and then just one word of how are you feeling today, really? Not the, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine, but truly, how are you? I love to get to know you all as we're getting started, and I will answer the same questions for you. So I am Missy Elliott. It says on the slides, my name is Melissa, which it is, that's my government name, a given name from when I was born. But there's 3 Melissas in the Office of Equity and Multicultural Services. So I get the opportunity to have my nickname be the same as my favorite rapper, Missy Elliott. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the service equity manager that works, consults, and partners with the Office of Developmental Disability Services. I'm really excited to be here with you all today to talk about service equity. And I see there's so many folks in here that are sharing. It's so great to see. I know folks are tired and feeling frazzled, scattered, accomplished, a little distracted, reflective. These are great. I so appreciate your authenticity, and I want you to continue to be authentic. We are all about you bringing your full authentic self to this space. So know that we are trying to create a community with you. That yes, we're going to be doing a lot of talking, but I will be honest, I'm not a big fan of talking at people. So when you have questions, if there's things that you're processing or that you're reacting to, I'd love to hear it. Even if that's in the chat, if it's however you process, if that's through the chat, if that's raising your hand to be heard over the mic, I want you to know that we 100% want your participation, however you feel is most meaningful to you. And that also includes if after this you want to reach out and just kind of have another conversation, that's totally fine too. So I'm going to pull up the screen and get us started to kind of talk about what we're going to be going over today. I know you saw that it's service equity and IDD services. Caitlin and I will be sharing a bit about what has been going on with service equity. What is it? How does it pertain to DD services? And let me see if I can get this to go. There we go. So we're going to define what service equity is. What does that mean for DD services? So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about what does that look like and how does it fit into some of the work that's happening both within ODDS and what that means for you all in your CDDPs and brokerages. And then we're going to just close out, give you some extra resources that you can look into, and also give a chance for questions along the way. So that's to get us started. And I see there's still folks that, ooh, I like it, Kaya, feeling go-getterish today. I appreciate that. So glad you all are here. Let's get right into this. So I'm going to define what service equity is. One of the things that I like to point out is we have 2 images on here for folks who might have some visual impairments. We like to talk about what images are on the screen. So on the left, you might see an image that has a teal background that says equity, building, sharing, and shifting power. So there's some images of a little construction scene, two people either talking to each other, and then a little balance beam. And all of it is about building, sharing, and shifting power. And some of the things that we're doing, not only in ODHS, but across all of Oregon services, is we're moving to become an anti-racist organization. And what that means is that we're not just looking at it during crisis times, but how do we embed and center equity for all different identities and leading intersectionally with race when we do so. And what that means is, as you can see on the right, there's an image that has a green background. Equality shows you some images of 4 people with bicycles, all the same. One on the left being a bicycle for a person with a wheelchair. You also then see a man or a person crouched over, very tall, on the same bicycle. You next see a person with long hair who fits pretty comfortably on that bicycle. And then lastly, a very small person trying to ride the bicycle but can't reach the lower pedal. That's equality, giving everyone the same bicycle or giving everyone the same supports. Equity, as we can see on the bottom of that image, is changing the bicycle. So as we can see, the person with the wheelchair now has a bicycle that has 3 wheels and hand pedals. We see a bigger bicycle for the next person so they don't have to crouch over. We see the same bicycle as the one above for the individual that fit comfortably, and a smaller bicycle for the smaller person. So I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I would rather see you and have a discussion about it. So I'm going to ask, and you can type it in the chat or you can speak out loud, maybe 1 or 2 people. But I'm going to ask, in DD services, what are we looking for in outcomes with the individuals that you all support and serve?
Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat.
Independence, self-directed lives, happiness, live their best life. I want to live my best life. I like that. Helping, support to live the lives that they want to live. All of these are right. Community inclusion, access to services. These are great. Okay, so let me ask the next question, and maybe this will feel a little silly, but I'm still going to ask it. Does the same approach work for different individuals? I'm getting quick answers. Heck no, I like that, Mendy. Whole, messy, complex lives. Yes, yes. So keeping this in mind, should we change things to get better results on an individual basis? And feel free, if there's anyone that's willing and able to be brave and come to the mic, feel free. I see Hillary. Sometimes I think it is really important to utilize knowledge we've gained from previous experiences to make suggestions. And yes, I can repeat the question. Should we change things to get better results on an individual basis? Absolutely. You need to meet folks where they're at so they can understand, address and adapt approaches for the person you're working with. Yeah, awesome. Next question, because I think I'm giving you some of the easier ones. Let's dig a little bit deeper. What are some issues that might come up while you're trying to find those results and help a person get to where they are living their best life or the life that they want? Access, past trauma, red tape. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All of these are so true. Availability, lack of service availability, languages needed, systemic barriers. These are great. I also love seeing that you all are participating because that just makes me feel like you're awake and you're ready to be participating with me. So, last question. Ooh. Do I hear someone that wants to speak on the mic? Oh, no. Okay. Got too excited. So my last question is, how can you all be part of the solution? How can you all be part of the solution? Be a real person, advocate with management, call things out when we see it. Yes. Snaps to all of you. Know my clients, advocate. Yes. Challenge, listen. Being here, 100%. Whoever wrote, Skyla wrote, being here is a good start. 100%. The fact that you're here is the biggest start you can make. We can recognize our own biases. Yes, Caitlin. Advocate with empathy. These are fantastic. And the reason I'm asking you these questions, I know that they don't seem like they're new concepts or ideas to any of you. I know a lot of the questions and answers that I saw in there have been tied to person-centeredness, have been tied to the work you all have come to know and love when you're doing this work. But the truth is, these answers are the same when we're talking about equity. Because the truth is, people with disabilities are not just people with disabilities. They're people with multiple identities. They have gender identity. They have their own gender expression. They have their individual race, ethnicity, language, cultural traditions, and things that make them uniquely who they are, just like you all are coming here today. And that's why we talk about equity. Equity, I also want to point out, is achieved when one's group affiliation or identity no longer defines the outcomes that they receive in services. So I'm going to pull up my screen and again show you that image that we were just talking about. On the right, equality is about giving everyone the same thing. But when we talk about equity, regardless of the person's identity, if they're using a wheelchair versus being a very tall person to being a very short person, equity is about adjusting our supports so that they all have an equal opportunity to do the thing that they want to do in their life. So with that, I'm going to pass this on to Caitlin, and we're going to show a video.
Yeah, thank you, Missy. And before we play this, I think just to springboard off of some of what you shared around what is identity and what is beyond disability and what are the other elements that make up a person. Race and disability are often thought of in systems, including our own, as completely separate identities and experiences, as though what we need to think about when we're supporting people with disabilities is completely separate and apart from and different from what we might need to think about when supporting communities of color. But this kind of thinking erases the fact that we're going to learn about in a minute from this video, that people have layered, complex identities, and that each layer of someone's intersectional identity is critical in making them a whole person. And each layer has a relationship with the other layers. So, and this is what we call intersectionality. So it's not just about race, disability, color, class, gender, gender identity, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender expression. And it's about the systems of oppression and the systemic and institutional barriers that exist and influence a person's life based on one or two or a whole multitude of the identities that make them who they are. And in addition to the different identities that people experience on all those layers that make them a whole person, racism and ableism and sexism and heterosexism and all of those things also go hand in hand in systems. I have a quote from a person named Isabella Cress Nash that I just want to read to you all. Let me get there. Okay. Racism and ableism are often thought of as parallel systems of oppression that work separately to perpetuate social hierarchy. Not only does this way of looking at the world ignore the experiences of people of color with disabilities, but it also fails to examine how race is pathologized in order to create racism, meaning that society treats people of color in specific ways to create barriers, and these poor conditions create disability. The concept of disability has been used to justify discrimination against other groups by attributing disability to them. That quote, that just spoke to me so deeply, and I thought immediately of the video we're about to watch when we're thinking about not just someone's identity and how we honor and welcome and support all aspects of it, but also how we dismantle and address the barriers that are in place related specifically to the layers of someone's identity. And for our system to center equity, like the concepts Missy just shared, equity versus equality, we have to be thinking about intersectionality. We have to be thinking about all of the ways that someone's identity shows up. Disability is our focus in the system that we're operating in. All of us work within a disability system, and disability is what unites our work and the people and the families that our work supports. But we can't ignore the fact that when we're thinking about improving our system, people exist in a myriad of ways and have myriads of identities that influence how they experience the world and what they need from our system. In a moment, Missy's going to talk about our umbrella agency, the Oregon Department of Human Services, and how it's leading with race and what that means. But it's really, to get to the brass tacks of it, racism is a system of oppression that's baked into every institution, including our own, and it's still the primary indicator of well-being and positive outcomes. And by focusing on race and anti-racism in the context of a disability system, in the context of intersectionality and all of the different identities people hold, we can positively impact all groups, all identities. And let's go ahead and hear from the speaker, Kay, and learn about their experience as a person that exists at the intersection of multiple identities that show up in their life and impact them every single day.
Hey, Caitlin, there was a request by me to put that quote into the chat.
Yes, I can do that.
Kate Wandai Barrett, activist, cultural worker, and disability justice advocate. Race and disability, race and gender, race and class. I can't go to a store or a doctor's office or a date and not be seen as brown, trans with a cane. There's no way. And I'm not going to choose any of those things. I do not want to minimize or dictate how people live and experience and identify. Intersectionality is really super critical to me. I'm not just attacked because I'm trans. I'm attacked because I'm brown and I'm disabled. People are being imprisoned, criminalized, harmed, not given jobs, not given medical support. They're not adequately being loved. It's critical that we get those resources, and it's critical that we get those resources from that community. Every day I'll be on a train and someone will, try to get a seat at the, disability access seating. And depending on that person, depending on how they see me and my masculinity, right? Brown masculinity is not supposed to be vulnerable. Gender nonconformity, are you a boy or a girl? And then I'm young, so you're not really disabled. So all of these things are coming into play on a frequent basis. And that happens when I'm at the medical office, when I'm with the doctor, how many times I'm misgendered. So if they see my brownness, we just want to talk about your brownness. When I'm in white queer spaces, like, let's just talk about you being transgender or queer. When I'm in very able-bodied, fit, radical people of color spaces, they don't really want to discuss access or the needs of my community being disabled. Real talk, white people are treated very different in the trans community than brown people, than Black people, than Latino people. Real talk, people with disabilities, oftentimes it's a lot of white people, cisexual, rich people who can afford healthcare, and that is not my community. For me, what's super pivotal is to acknowledge that race doesn't just move everything along, but that it interprets and informs all the other parts of me. It's because somebody is brown and trans. It is because somebody is physically disabled or perceived as crazy, right? And brown and Black. And those things inform each other. When somebody says, oh, that trans person of color is so lazy, they don't know how to get a job. Well, A, that's ableism. They think that they can't work. B, sexism, and C, anti-Blackness is a racism, right? So all of those things are tools, are weapons happening simultaneously on me, on you. I think it's really critical that we engage in dialogues that might make us uncomfortable. If we don't address that depth, our level of depth, and also the level of depth to which we are being harmed and limited, I don't think we're going to be able to really do groundbreaking work or innovative work to address our needs. And in order to do so, we have to not just see race in a vacuum.
Yeah. Thank you, Skyla. Not adequately being loved. I have to say there's so many quotes in there. The title of the video is Race and Intersectionality. I can make sure that that is on our resource slide and ensure that you all have the link to that, because I already closed it out. But let's get our slideshow back up for us. So I know folks are in here, and I would love to ask if you all have pens to type in one word that really hit home with you, or that you were thinking about as you were watching that video. I nailed it. Thank you, Caitlin, for putting in their website. Loved, acknowledgement. Too young to be valued or have a disability. Enlightening. Genuineness, critical. These are great. Keep them coming. And I'm going to just kind of talk to you all about what we're seeing on this slide right now. So how does service equity, as we were talking about equity, intersectionality, how does it fit into everything that we know umbrella-wise around Oregon Department of Human Services? And then how does that then inform some of the work that's happening in ODDS and with you all as staff within CDDPs and brokerages? What does this all mean? So just to give you a bit, I want to start off at kind of a mile high look down on our service system. You know, ODDS, you all are contracted to work within ODDS. ODDS is within the Oregon Department of Human Services. And the Oregon Department of Human Services created an Equity North Star that was created in partnership with all of the programs. We went through a process to ensure that we had voices from all of the programs involved in the Equity North Star to say, this is where we're going with equity. And what that North Star says is that we lead with race and intersectionality, that we ensure that we make services and supports and well-being accessible to all, regardless of their multiple identities, that we partner with communities to deliver policies and programs. And most importantly, we know that this is working if all Oregonians, regardless of their identity or place, achieve well-being, whatever that means to that person. And that really aligns with what we know ODDS values are and what they include, right? So there's person-centered practices. We know that ODDS and you all are always prioritizing person-centeredness, community inclusion, having strong relationships. And ODDS also has in their values service equity and access. And then back in 2018, I know we're in 2021 now, but as of 2018, ODDS created a 5-year strategic plan. And one of their strategic goals explicitly talked about equity, creating a system that is sustainable, easy to use, with effective communication and equitable access. So with that, we really then broke into how do we look at all of this and actually turn this into actions. And I want to call in that in our resource slide, when we get there, that these also then tie into the governor's diversity, equity, and inclusion action plan. So they created a roadmap to racial equity and belonging for the state of Oregon. And we want to make sure that at every level of our service system, we're all aligned to really address the unique needs of individuals, making sure that our services are culturally responsive to an individual's multiple identities around race, ethnicity, language, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. We really wanted to make sure that those are all explicitly stated. So you will have access to that link if you want to look into that a little bit more too. So our next slide is going to be Caitlin talking about some of the initiatives that have been taken on by ODDS and how we're turning this into actions.
So ODDS has had a service equity committee for many years that has been meeting regularly, first coming together before my time here, before Missy's time here, but coming together to support each other, identify and brainstorm problems, solutions, share tips and tools, all kinds of things. And then about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, time is a circle now and nothing makes sense. I think about 2 years ago, that group began formalizing their work and laying the foundation for really a big undertaking within our program, within ODDS, to shift, improve, transform the way ODDS operates in order to truly improve equitable access to services for every community. It's not quick work, and the group wasn't interested in band-aids or the things that were fastest or easiest, but really thinking about as a system, as a program, and all of the work that we do, how can we change things for the better? How can we truly reach the people that need reaching? How can we truly improve our practices at every step of the way and in every unit and in every part of our system? That is the work that this group set out to identify and prioritize. And ODDS leadership is fully supportive of and invested in this work. And we are slowly but surely plugging along. So back to that, the shift of that committee. Over time, the group gathered up all of the things that they had been discussing over those years that they had been meeting to identify what are some themes, what are some groups, things that we can cluster together that different people might be able to work on and strategize and find solutions for. And I believe identified well over 30 areas of interest and need, 30 distinct themes. And then finally, work to keep narrowing them down, to keep kind of rethinking what goes together, what is logical, what makes sense, and narrowed it down into 6 areas that you see on your screen. And those are the things that we're going to dive into in just a moment. And Missy and I will take turns talking about them. All of these priority areas are essential for ODDS to reach what this group and the program now as a whole has adopted as its Equity North Star. And that Equity North Star is to improve within 2 years, to improve the equitable delivery of DD services. And that means improving, we're thinking about better performance and the reduction of gaps and disparities verified by data. And when we say equitable services, equitable delivery of services, we mean achieving a state where the person's background does not define their outcome. And that is essential to that work is recognizing disparities that exist and eliminating those disparities through action. And the 2 years that we have for our timeline here begin once our action plan is complete. And that action plan is currently in the works, one thing at a time that we're working through to make this pretty monumental shift in how we operate. Oh, and briefly, okay, that's fine. I was gonna say I could summarize them. They're on your screen. The 6 priority areas: the diversity of the workforce, developing a data plan, our funding and budgetary decision-making, our policies and procedures, language access, and engaging communities. And we're going to spend time talking about each of those things. And you are so welcome to ask questions or clarification as needed.
Absolutely. So let me see. Am I muted? I'm not. Okay. So just to go over this, it is in development, and the process that we're going through in ODDS is ensuring that staff from all different levels within ODDS are part of creating that action plan and developing that. I'm not here, and Caitlin is not here to direct or lead what that work looks like, but really say, this is the work that ODDS has identified, and have employee-led task forces to address what they're seeing internally to the ODDS program. So the first initiative that was taken on was increasing the diversity of the workforce. There was a task force there were multiple task forces that took on this initiative. So we had 3 of them. One of them was on recruitment and selection. We had a group that was looking at the onboarding and offboarding processes. So when someone comes on and is hired, how are we introducing them to the work environment? How are we setting the foundation to understand the culture within ODDS and ensure that people feel welcome and supported in this work? And then lastly, having an ongoing mentorship program within ODDS so that a person continues to feel supported in the work that they do and can continue to grow and learn in the position that they have. These all were identified as gaps within ODDS that was really continuing to maintain a lack of diversity in the workforce, and wanted to use these as a way to also look at progress in increasing that diversity.
Missy,
yes.
We had a question come in that asked, what role did Black, Indigenous, people of color folks and people with disabilities play in creating this plan?
So yes, the ODDS Service Equity Committee is filled with a diverse group of people from different parts of the ODDS program. And I will say that our group, our workforce within ODDS is a very limited amount of diversity. We have folks with different identities that are in the group. I myself am someone who identifies as a person of color, and we have a few other folks that do too. But the truth is, there isn't that much diversity within ODDS. So that is something that has been limited and part of a barrier for this work. We have ensured that we've tried to partner with some of the folks in OEMS, and we also try and share that feedback with our ERGs, which are employee resource groups that have different identities, but that is something that is a little bit limited. Thank you for that question.
It's a great question, and would add that this plan is still in development. So what we're working on now is building the plan, and we're not there yet. And we don't have the relationships and community engagement practices in place to help us get there at this point. And that's one of our priority areas that we hope to strategize, again, led by staff, not by management, not by me, not by Missy, but by groups of folks who are doing the work every day from all different units of ODDS, who do represent a diversity of their own backgrounds and their own lived experience, to help us identify what is working and what is definitely not working, so that we can get to that place. And hopefully that investment in engaging communities and working with communities that we'll talk about in a few slides will be a key part of how, once we have the makings of a plan, how can we engage, bring communities in? How can we support each other to improve that plan, to finalize that plan, and then to hold ourselves and have communities hold us accountable to implement it?
Lastly, I do want to share that is, we have kind of made an intentional practice to start with the things that are internal to ODDS first, while we're trying to get a Service Equity Council up on board. There's an intentional planning process that we're going to ensure that we have diverse communities and folks from communities of color, folks from all different areas within ODDS. So not just central office ODDS, but also providers, case management, entity representation, family advocates, self-advocates, and community partners from diverse communities. So communities of color, our tribal nations, and ensuring that those folks can also help advise on the efforts that are being made within ODDS. And that's been a slow process to get that started, but they will also be a part of developing this and informing what goes forward as we get to those elements that are outward facing for ODDS as well. So I really appreciate that question, and I hope you appreciate the transparency that we're still not there yet and the work we have to do.
Yeah, they said, thank you for the responses, much appreciated.
Yeah. All right, so we kind of talked about that first block there, but I also want to point out that one of the things that ODDS has been a part of and has been a very strong advocate for is the State as a Model Employer program. I don't know how many folks on here are aware or familiar with that, but part of that increasing diversity of the workforce is knowing that we have a very small fraction of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have access to working for the state or entering state service as a staff member. So the State as a Model Employer program is a program that's put into place to direct appoint someone who is eligible for, who's identified as a person with IDD and is eligible for DD services to gain employment at the state or in state government. So that is a program that has started with very limited amount of positions that it's available to. But I know that ODDS has been working very closely with VR and our Human Resources Department to really talk about how can we expand that to more positions and other efforts that can go on around that. And then lastly, I want to point out that even throughout these conversations is that culture of support and inclusion. When we're talking about our recruitment selection practices, when we're talking about onboarding and mentoring, it's not just about recruiting people with diverse backgrounds. So people of color, people who are LGBTQIA2S+, but also how are we maintaining and retaining those staff and ensuring that they feel safe and welcome in the spaces that they're working in as state employees. So there's been a lot of work with HR. There's been a lot of intentional and critical looks at what is missing right now and what could help make that better in the future, because we recognize that you can't just bring people in. If we don't address the workplace culture, we are only going to set people up for failure in that process. So that's another piece to this. I'm going to pass this on to Caitlin to talk about our data plan.
Thank you, Missy. So our next priority area that we will begin diving into as we are now kind of moving into some more deeper work and increasing the diversity of the workforce priority is to develop a plan that really identifies what information do we need to measure to know that we've met that equity North Star. How are we going to collect that data reliably and accurately? So looking beyond the systems that we already have access to, the data that we already collect, that we already have. But are there other places we need to look? Is there other work that we need to do to ensure that that data is reliable and accurate and verifiable? And how can we share data about who we serve, about what we're doing, about the success of our work, about the outcomes associated with services in a way that is accessible and transparent to all? And it's really not about just looking once and taking a one-time snapshot, but over time, consistently, and as tied to potential changes or initiatives. So for example, Missy talked on the last slide about increasing the diversity of our workforce, and a number of action items that are being identified that we think are going to help us get there and help us improve the diversity and the representation of ODDS, knowing that representation is critical to ensuring that the work that we produce as a system, as a program, actually works for the people it's intended to work for, and it works for everyone. So how can we collect the right data to know if something we do works or not, if it's successful or if it's not successful, or if we need to change course correct? How can we align our data collection and our analysis of data to actual action steps that we're taking that we hope, with good intentions, hope work? How do we actually make sure that that's the case? And then this plan is also about ensuring that we're tracking meaningfully what we think are best practices to see if those have intended outcomes and how they inform us changing in response if they don't. So it's really a big, not just about our North Star, but also about these individual components and about cleaning up and ensuring that the data we collect out on the system as a whole that we've done for many years is accurate, is valid, is verifiable, and it truly represents the people that are served by our system.
All right, so this one is about budgetary decisions. And I know we say with an equity lens, but I like to point out that we're centering equity in all of this work. Lenses imply that it's something that you can take on and off when you feel like it. And we really want to be centering and embedding equity in all of these processes. And I know that you see here, it's about investing resources to build capacity, and then also talking about those the programmatic decisions that then have a budgetary impact, not only to ODDS as a central office, but then how does that create impacts to you all in CDDPs and brokerages? So we want to make sure that when we're making those decisions that we recognize the ways in which it's either perpetuating a system that creates different levels of benefit or access to different groups of people, or how is it actually impacting equity and meeting the needs of communities that have either been historically underserved or underrepresented in services. So those are the things that we need to pay attention to with our data and be able to then say, how are we using the information we're getting to also make budgetary decisions that impact our entire system in an equitable way.
And before we move on, Caitlin, we did have one question come up. Has ODDS developed ideas on how to collect data yet?
It's a great question. And we have, in the Service Equity Committee, we began with really talking about what data do we think we need to, and why? Why would knowing the race and ethnicity of people that are served in 24-hour settings and adult foster homes, for example, why would that information be useful? What would that maybe tell us or not tell us about the effectiveness of our system, access within our system by different groups of people? So that's what we've started with. And that's really with the attempt to, or the intent to not be limited by what can we easily get today out of Express? What can we pull out of MMIS? And then what can we do with that information? Knowing that there are a number of folks whose, for example, race and ethnicity is identifies as NA or not available or is blank. So sometimes we don't know all the information that we probably need to know about our system as a whole. So to not be limited by what's available now, we've started with that what and why. And then I expect that we'll identify new sources of data that we might need to explore or ways that we can improve or clean the data that we do have to make sure that it's accurate and make sure that it's representative of the people that receive our services, of our providers, of our workforce, all of those things. So I guess it's in progress, but we're trying to start with kind of that blue sky approach of not being limited by what can we get today, what can we get now, and really thinking about this at bigger picture so that we can build a data collection system that truly gets at the heart of why we're doing this work.
Caitlin, I
Is
love that.
there, sorry, Missy,
Go ahead.
is there, so somebody was just, they said, thank you. They were just curious. They like methodology. I would ask, in addition to this question, is there a place where people can submit ideas if they have ideas for ODDS on how to collect this data, and where can they submit those ideas as they're starting maybe to get excited about hearing some of these ideas? Where can they send their excitement?
Send on me.
Well, that's not fair, Missy. That's too much excitement to go to one person.
Oh,
I'm
I
just
love
kidding.
it. No, because the thing is, it's not, I'm not, so I say that not to be a gatekeeper of the information, but to truly, let's make it so that there is a contact person for you all. Feel free to send those suggestions to me because they go to the ODDS Service Equity Committee. I don't keep them for myself. It gets sent out immediately to everybody else in that group. And ensuring that they're part of that conversation. The other thing that I was going to share really quickly, I loved what Caitlin said, and in an effort to be also transparent, you know, ODDS is also working to develop that case management system that we all have been, you know, dreaming about for years, right? And the hope is that because this is timely that we're having these conversations about data plans, as well as defining what does it mean to ODDS? What does it look like to be a data-driven organization? How do we look at the data and ensure that we're not just making like bad decisions based on that data, or working it so it looks one way versus what the data is actually telling us, but really truly looking at what does it mean to be a data-driven organization, and ensuring that the things that we're talking about around data gets built into the case management system as it's developed. So it's already embedded with the equity data and equity initiatives that ODDS is taking on from the get-go too.
And then one other question that came through was if ODDS, or does the ODDS group have representation from CMEs on the service equity group to keep people in the field involved and abreast?
That's a great question, Laura. I was just typing you an answer. So this group is our internally focused service equity committee. And then as Missy shared, there's progress in the works right now to develop a more like community involved service equity council that is bigger and has a kind of more oversight over bigger things. than the ODDS Service Equity Committee that's really looking at what do we do, what's within our purview that we need to change in order to make this happen. But a companion group that we have is the CME Service Equity Partners Group, and we'll be talking about that in a few slides, and also giving information on how, if you want to join that group or get involved with them, how you can do that. And that's a group that's also been meeting for many years. And Missy and I participate, as well as some program managers and brokerage directors, PAs, and service coordinators, and I think some other CME staff who participate on a regular basis. But that group is also kind of beginning to think about, how do these priority areas look at the CME level? And what could some of this work look like that's aligned with what ODDS is doing? And then additionally, it's really starting with today's session, we've been talking about these priorities with program managers here and there for about a year, but we have not started talking about these priorities and these ideas with the community. We haven't started talking about them with people who are doing the work every single day, like most of you on this call. So today is our first step in really saying, here's what ODDS is doing, and we want to hear from you if we're on the right track, what your ideas are, how you can contribute to some of this work and help inform us and along the way. And that's what we're doing now. And then eventually working on, how can we share this with the community at large? So how are we talking to families and people with IDD and providers about what is our plan, what is our draft plan, and how can we work with you to make it happen? So that's really, we're kind of at that beginning stage of bringing people in and seeing sharing this information initially, and then what it will look like moving forward on a regular basis. How do we keep talking about it and keep engaging you all? And had a comment, he sent me a chat and would like to speak up. And then I think there's also another question in the chat as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. So I saw the question where it asked, what has ODDS developed ideas on how to collect data yet? And I just wanted to share one of the things that we've been doing. Most of you have had experience probably either collecting information for us around the National Core Indicators Adult In-Person Survey. So you may or may not also be aware that some of the questions that are answered in that are part of or provided are part of our ODDS strategic plan. Some of the questions are related to the indicators of success. And so for a few years we've been doing a stratified random sample where our stratum were related to where people lived primarily and the setting in which they lived. And last year, for the first time, recognizing that the answers to these questions connected to our strategic plan affect the conversations that we have, we added a race and ethnicity stratum as well, which we haven't done before. And so what we did there is, and I won't get too technical with you, but we used a coefficient so that we were looking at 1.5 times the number of people, or including 1.5 times the number of people that were not part of our dominant culture here in Oregon, and then less than 1% or 1-to-1 for those that are. This year, we increased that even more, so that the coefficient is 2.4 times the number that is typically represented. So we're doing more and more that we can to try to increase the voice of people that are they're not a part of our dominant culture here in Oregon.
Thank you, Brent.
And I wasn't sure if this is a question, more so a comment, but I'll read it anyway. It's from Crystal. In my work, the most frustrating thing is when a person being served in a home all of a sudden needs placement. If they don't have a high enough pay rate, the foster homes / group homes don't even want to have a conversation because they will not be paid enough to support them.
Yes, share the frustration.
Yeah.
and the challenges around services and service access, especially right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to pass this on to Caitlin because I think that's a really good segue for us to kind of talk about policies, procedures, and rules.
Yeah, this is something I'm very excited about, working in the policy unit. And this is really about rethinking the way we develop policy from the first idea that someone has somewhere that thinks we need to create a policy, or there's some issue that needs to be addressed somehow through written policy, all the way to its implementation. Thinking differently and from the beginning about who we are trying to reach, what problem we're trying to solve, and questioning from the very beginning, does this policy reduce disparities among marginalized communities? Does it potentially increase disparities that might be experienced by marginalized communities? Are there differences in how this policy could be implemented based on where a person lives or how they identify? How can those be eliminated either by the policy itself or perhaps through the implementation guidance that could come alongside that policy? Who is involved in developing policy and informing the analysis of its impact? Can it be implemented consistently but equitably as it's written from the beginning? Can, if it's not equitable, if it can't be implemented consistently, if we identify that there are potential barriers or pitfalls, and some of those outside of our own control, what can we do to change that? What can we do to mitigate those impacts and eliminate those disparities? Will some communities experience additional barriers to benefiting from this policy? Who and why? And can the policy itself or the guidance that supports it, as I mentioned, address those barriers? Those are just a series of questions. I know that they're not answers, they're just questions, but that is the way that we hope to start thinking about policymaking within our program, with a lot of questions from the very beginning, that when something is written and issued and out there, that these things have already been considered, that they are built in to the policy itself, knowing that not doing that, that going to the status quo or what is natural or easy or de facto is what is the current system that we have. And I don't just mean ODDS or our program, but just the systems in this state and in this country that have a foundation in racism, have a foundation in uplifting and upholding dominant culture and not giving access to other communities. So to change that is not just a one layer or one lens or one step, but really thinking about equity and centering equity from the very beginning, from an idea and then carrying that through all the way to implementation. And then looking at, did it work, right? Going back to that data plan, how can we evaluate whether when we push this button, when this policy went into place, who did it reach and who didn't it reach? And then if there's something wrong or there is a disparity, how can we regroup and make changes? And then finally, how do we engage communities in not just understanding what is out there, but contributing to the development of policy and rule? So how are we rethinking the way that we engage communities in the Rule Advisory Committee process and our stakeholder groups, et cetera, so that they can be involved from the beginning, informing us in how we develop policy?
Just giving a second to see if there's any questions. Okay. Next is the language access efforts. So just to let folks know, again, in an effort of transparency, this is something that's been worked on for many years in ODDS. And I know that there's a lot, there's been, from all of the CDDPs and brokerages that I've had a chance to meet with, this is a trend that I hear from each and every CDDP and brokerage that I speak with, whether that's you all as SEs and PAs, or if we're hearing it from program managers or directors. that there is this confusion and concern around language access and the ability to provide supports and services in the language of the individual and family that you're supporting. So some of the efforts that are happening around that, I do want to say, the good thing is there was a legislative pop that came out in this last legislative session that was to talk about providing more clarity around language access services and increasing the accessibility of language access services to CDDPs and brokerages. So here are some of the efforts that have been happening within ODDS and the Department of Human Services, and hopefully we will continue to see additional access to that in the future as the work group gets started and we really address how do they use the funding that came from that legislative policy option package and turn that into actionable items for the DD service system. So we know that there's a glossary of terms that have started to be developed in support of making sure that forms and information that came from all ODHS programs were translated in a timely manner and that they were using the right language. So making sure that it was disability affirming language rather than maybe some antiquated or outdated labels that have been used in other languages. And then we ensured that that involved all of the different programs in that process. We want to also work on translating written materials. So any ODDS forms that are out there, if they're English only and we need to get that into another language, we want to be able to do that in a timely manner for you all to ensure that you're able to give that information to the people that you're supporting. And then looking at what are the policy and requirements for the service delivery system, knowing that we need to address the needs of our civil rights, our federal civil rights laws, and our ADA accommodations. So ensuring that we are not only doing it with language access, but looking at alternate forms. So if we need Braille, if we need it in spoken word versus having something in writing, ensuring that we're really addressing all of those needs in an equitable way. And process for accessing translation, interpretation, and alternate format resources. So really looking at the timeliness of those requests and ensuring that there's a transparency and clarity of what the steps are to get that taken care of on all levels within our service delivery system. Any questions there? I see we have more in the chat, but I'm not going to open it. I learned that I was making a big black box on our slides.
So one of the questions Caitlin answered, so I'll read the question and then I'll read the response. So one question was, who decides what policy is addressed or looked at? The response to that was, great question. We will need to figure out how to evaluate what already exists through this process and then prioritize what to do first. Ideally, everything, sorry, I had to scroll, we create will go through this process in a step-by-step way. Looking back at existing policy will, I think, be harder than starting with new policy. We've identified the need and importance of evaluating policy and procedures this way, but haven't yet identified how. That's coming next. And so then the other comment question was, I wonder if accessible language, simple/plain language, could be used more widely in our systems as the quote unquote norm, not just when specifically aimed at certain people or communities. And there was a comment that they totally agree.
I 100% agree. You know, one of the things is in Oregon, we have a state law around having accessible language. And I would still say that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're not using legal jargon, that we're really making our rules, our policies, and everything that we put out accessible to folks so that it doesn't sound so jargony or filled with acronyms. How do we start really making sure that at all levels of our services, not just ODDS, but all of Department of Human Services and our other state agencies are really looking at making the information that they're giving out to everybody, staff, case managers, advocates, family advocates, everyone has that information that is in an understandable way. I'm going to pass this on to Caitlin to talk about community engagement.
Thank you. And this really ties back to a lot of the things we've talked about so far today, and how we need those relationships, reciprocal relationships with communities that have historically been left out of our process and left out of our work in order to do all of these things. And especially looking at policies and procedure, especially thinking about language access and our data plan. The questions that are essential to this priority is really, do people even know who we are? What is our relationship to the people and families that our system supports? How can we create it, strengthen it, while still supporting the critical local relationships that you all have with people? So not to subvert in any way the importance of the relationship that a person has with their local case management entity, with their services coordinator or personal agent, and the people that they go to as their main point of contact. But how do we make sure that people do know how our system operates and what our role is in supporting them through a number of things, through writing the rules that then the services coordinator has to implement and has to explain to you, by processing complaints when there might be an issue between a person and a provider or case management entity. What is a person's feeling or response when a letter comes in the mail with the ODHS logo on it, and it's related to their developmental disability services, but they don't know that their developmental disability services are funded by or administered through the state of Oregon? These are all things we acknowledge are true, but we have not figured out how to solve this problem yet. Our community is aware of and equitably supported to engage in our advisory groups. We have a number of ad hoc or as needed type of advisory groups that we pull together on different issues, other groups that have been existing and meeting for a number of years. We, of course, have focus groups sometimes as different priorities come up or different systems change efforts arise. We have our rule advisory committees. Are all communities aware of those? Are all communities supported to equitably engage in those and have the support that they need to make that possible? And then are we listening to the input that we do hear when we do hear it? And how are we coming back to communities, answering their questions, working together to solve problems that have been identified? Are we asking for input from all communities? Are we giving input to our community, different communities as well? Again, with that reciprocal nature of these relationships, where we aren't just asking for feedback, but also giving feedback, also sharing ideas and resources with our community partners as well, and our tribal nations partners. So really, a whole gamut of need around working with communities. And as Missy kind of shared earlier, our intention is to think about some internal work first. So we have started with that diversity of the workforce on purpose, knowing that the representation that we have internally is going to be a big factor in being able to have success in these other priority areas, especially this one, knowing that that representation and the understanding of culture and race and community is critical to actually building strong relationships.
Great, and I know that we're coming up on time, so we're going to go through some of the other our ongoing efforts and might skip over a couple of slides so that we can also get to our resources here. So just to let you all know some of the ongoing efforts that are happening with ODDS that also then come into we have talked a lot about what's happening internally to ODDS, but I really want to get into how does this all then tie into your work as case managers in CDDPs and brokerages, or wherever you are placed within the DD service system. So one of the things that we're doing is we're working to continue to build on relationships and collaborate with our case management entity service equity partners. So we have a group that comes together. It originally started as a group to for bilingual case managers to come together and talk about some of the barriers they experience, the challenges they've had in supporting people who are bilingual, who are accessing and utilizing DD services. But that has actually grown and expanded to be about equity and really addressing all of the different needs that we see coming up in case management entities, and then elevating what trends we hear across CDDPs and brokerages to ODDS so that that can be addressed on a systemic level. For example, one of the results that came out of this group is piloting a program that offers DD services and case management services through without immigration status. And that's what I was trying to get at. I'm sorry, I'm starting to lose my mind here. But that was one of the pilots that came out of it is being able to provide eligible individuals with DD case management supports that are through general funds, regardless of immigration status. And so that was a really big win for that group. Next is supporting the case management entity service equity assessment. So there is an ongoing effort that got put into contracts in this last biennium. So this year and next year, starting July 1, to look at and assess your own local organizations that says, how are we doing around service equity? And there are some very specific elements that go into that assessment that we spoke with program managers and brokerage directors about. And then the next year is to take the results of that assessment and turn them into action plans, similarly to what ODDS is now doing that we just went over with you all. We also are going through a process to complete an ODDS programmatic assessment. So not only are we asking case management entities to go through that process, but ODDS is going through a process to address how are their services on a statewide level either really meeting the needs around service equity or have opportunities to address service equity in its programs, in its data, and all of the different elements that are also listed in the CME service equity assessment. We continue to provide technical assistance and support to various levels of the DD service system. So for example, we have requests coming in from the Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition. We also helped with some of the work that was happening with the Oregon Council on Developmental Disabilities. And whenever a request comes in, we analyze, or not analyze, but we review the scope of the work of the request that's coming in. Is it something that can be easily addressed in a meeting? Or is it something where we need to involve, the ODDS Service Equity Committee, the CME Service Equity Partner Group, or a larger community, a community advisory board like the council that's in its planning stages right now. And lastly, we are going to continue building the relationships. So not only did we talk about community engagement, but we are also learning through the process of partnering with our tribes that a lot of folks don't understand DD services. So one of the things that Caitlin and I have been in the process of working on is how do we develop more meaningful language and understanding about DD services for cultural groups who haven't had a chance to really understand how DD services might support one of their family members or themselves in gaining supports and services that will be both culturally responsive and meet their needs around intellectual and developmental disabilities.
We had 2 questions come in and a suggestion.
Yeah.
So the first question is, when will the template for the assessment be delivered to CDDPs?
That is a great question. So there is not a template for the assessment. There was a meeting that was done a few months ago where we talked through some of the assessments that are available to organizations that they can use to address the different assessment needs. But ODDS actually was very intentional about having more general language about that assessment process. They wanted to make sure that here's the elements that were identified by the CME Service Equity Partner Group to address service equity priorities, but the organization could then use an assessment that's out there that instead of having to create their own, or if they already have one in place, ensure that those elements are already part of their assessment. We didn't want to dictate what that looked like. So there is not a template for that, but we could always talk about what is out there if folks are needing that.
The next question was, am I understanding correctly that the offering of DD services to individuals regardless of immigration status is in a few pilot counties? Which counties? Any idea when it might become statewide?
I can speak to that.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, so at that pilot, it was around offering case management services to individuals regardless of their immigration status. And that was piloted, I know, in Multnomah and Benton counties, and possibly another county I cannot recall. But we are in the process of making that change statewide. Timeline
Marion.
depends on, sorry, Marion? Thank you, Michael. The timeline is dependent on just our rulemaking process and publications process. So the preliminary plan is that this would involve a rule change to the CDDP rule, taking out the requirement of citizenship or a certain kind of legal status in order to be eligible for DD services. Also a change to the DD services application. And with the intent of making this change, we're also recognizing that alongside those changes, we would need guidance to support eligibility specialists and others and having conversations with people about what case management is, which I know people know that already, but in the context of what it would look like to receive case management services versus the other array of services that are dependent on Medicaid eligibility, which does require a certain kind of legal status. But also having conversations about immigration status, about citizenship status, and possibly about public charge as well, so that this can be supportive and holistic and not just something that comes out without any guidance or support to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable applying for services and receiving case management if they need it.
Thank you. And then one suggestion that came through was, are there visuals, like a picture chart, that can show how the whole funding system works, for how, the whole funding system for individuals and services? They could see how something like that would be helpful, especially if it was paraphrased, translated, and accessible, like available on the state website. So just an idea of kind of the funding streams for people and services, that might be very helpful.
It's a great idea.
It's a great suggestion. Thank you to whoever suggested it.
I wonder if we should skip to resources and also just let additional questions come in. And we will email this out to you so you can see what we skipped. Yes, we absolutely will. So here are some additional resources for you all. I know we have on here a little bit about the Equity North Star. If folks are wanting to look into that a little bit more, you have my email on here, and we can add Caitlin's on here too, but I know she's getting really busy as the policy manager. Hopefully we'll also be able to share out in the future the person-centered practice and service equity coordinator that is in the recruitment stages for ODDS. That would be another resource for folks that want to continue conversations around service equity.
We also included the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan that came from the governor's office, if folks want to look into that. Then these are SINS Invalid, PDX Disability Justice Collective, the Disability Equity Center, Disability Visibility Project, Rooted in Rights, ADAPT organization are all organizations that continuously send out articles and have some really great events and things that you can get involved with so that you can dive a little bit deeper into disability justice and intersectionality of people with disabilities and equity work around race and other forms of identities, if that's something you're interested in. We also included a couple of articles for you. So Creating Collective Access is an article, and the intersections and divergences of disability and race are two that really look at the history around disability and race and how that's played a huge part in the US history here, if that's something you're interested in. And lastly, a YouTube video. I'll make sure to add to this one before it gets sent out to you, the YouTube video from Kay Lunde Barrett that we watched earlier. And then another video that talks about humanizing diversity and inclusion. Because one of the things that I love about the video that's on here is you can really look at what has it been like for you to feel like you haven't belonged, and how often when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, how do we stop that feeling for others? Because all of us have a time where we haven't felt like we've belonged, and can probably talk very in depth about that. So I won't go too much into that, but I know my next slide is just questions. So I'm gonna take my slide down and see if folks have questions or wanna chitty chat it up. I'm really good with uncomfortable silences, so I'm just putting that out there.
I guess I'm not as good with the uncomfortable silences. I'm trying, but I'm like, if you have a question, please ask. And if you don't, maybe it'd be interesting to see how you all are feeling now, how you were feeling about an hour and a half ago. We asked you and checked in with you. And I would love to see how folks are feeling as we close out our time together.
Thank you, Michael. Time well spent. Ooh, thanks, Jesse. I see smiles on Brooke's face. I'm feeling good about that.
Good to see you, Brooke.
Good to see you. Still wonderful. Yes. Cassandra, I just need to read this out loud. This is 100% really important, and I didn't get to call us in before. September 30th, or today, is a day of recognizing harm done to generations of children in residential schools. So I also want to bring that up. It's not just about children in residential schools. It is also very specific to women and children who are missing from indigenous tribes in not just Oregon, but all across our country and in the world. That is something that is a huge problem in our country and across the world. So if you're interested in learning more about that what this is about is the Indian boarding schools. And I know, unfortunately, Adam isn't able to do the training later today, but if you have a chance when that's up on the Service Learning Series website, please access that training. He did a great job to talk about that too. We do have lots of work to do. Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, everyone. I do have to relieve our captioner and have to close out our time, but please do reach out with your questions. And it was just so wonderful to spend time with you all today and over these past 9 weeks to see so many of you showing up again and again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.